Hello and welcome to English Literature with Susan. Today I'm going to talk about Imagist poetry and especially Amy Lowell's poem September 1918. Before moving to the poem, I prefer to have a brief introduction to what is Imagist poetry and the role Amy Lowell played in all that movement. The Imagist poetry is a rather short movement happening in 1920s and before that, so 1910s, 1920s is a time in which Imagist poetry had its short-term life, and the Imagist poetry was not first started with Amy Lowell, but she became the emblem, the symbol of the movement. And Ezra Pound, though in ironic terms, has called the movement Imagism rather than Imagism. So Imagist poetry mostly was focused on American poetry, whether the American poets who were living at a moment in the United States or the ones who had preferred an expatriate life living in Europe, like Ezra Pound. Ezra Pound was a major proponent of the movement at first, and he had defined poetry, the Imagist poetry in some short terms, that Imagist poetry is not descriptive that much. It goes towards a direct representation of the image. So we can say that the Imagist poetry in a way is what is not expressive, what is not romantic. It's an anti-romantic type of poetry. By romantic, I mean romantic movement in which the focus was on the emotions, the feelings of the poet, and his creative faculties, as well as his individuality or her individuality. So in Romanticism, the focus is on the poet, and in Imagism, the focus is on the image. And that's why, because of that focus on the image, they try to represent hardcore images on the poetry, that it is hard, it is terse, it is solid. The poem focuses merely on the image itself, without any descriptive passages, without any meditations on the side of the author, without any expressions of the emotions. So all of these are considered as extra and, unwanted ornaments to poetry, and poetry should focus on the image itself, without any kinds of commentaries, for example. And let me add something. This is just how Ezra Pound and the other proponents of the movement had defined Imagist poetry. But it was Amy Lowell that took everything at her hand for a while. She even made some anthologies, some collections of the Imagist poetry. So she was, no, one writer has written, that one of her biographers has written, that Amy Lowell was poetry incorporation. So she was, or we can say poetry.com today. So she was poetry, but when she was alive, she wasn't just treated with respect with the fellow male poets. Ezra Pound, for example, was rather angry with her because Ezra Pound thought that Lowell had just stolen his kind of poetry, and he used that kind of imagism instead of imagism in a satiric mode, that it is not anymore what I have suggested, it is Amy's, so get whatever she wants. It's no more what Ezra does. And Ezra Pound and other poets had also given her negative or bad epithets, like hippopotamus. And they believe that it is very imagist, because they have made the image of the poet. Amy Lowell was very fat, and she she was mocked for that, and that adjective hippopotamus, or the descriptive term, was like that emerging of two words, a portmanteau kind of word, or she was called even an elephantess or something. So, and not only her contemporary fellow poets, but also many of her biographers have always merged the image of Amy's body with her poetry. And this is not that much, we can say that it's quite not at all a critical way of manner. It's not objectively just assuming that we're talking about the boy, we're talking about her body. And even she was body shamed, she was mocked because they believe that a person with such a body is not capable of any types of eroticism. And so when she talked about love, she was mocked once again. But these things had kind of colluded Amy's time when she was alive, but afterwards, she could sustain a position in the canon of Anglophone, modern Anglophone poetry. This very text, for example, is a poem by Lowell. It's a paragraph poem. It's no the medium for these poems, if they wanted a kind of structure on the page, which is line by line, they preferred free verse. So no metrics, no rhyme scheme. But sometimes Amy Lowell and other Imagist poets wrote in paragraphs, and these are called paragraph poems. They have internal rhymes, they have alliterations, consonants, assonance, and things like that. So the musicality comes from elsewhere, not from metrics, that conventional metrical system or prosody of English poetry, and the scheme of the rhymes. So a rhyme pattern, a conventional rhyme pattern, is not uh, that much favored by these images posts. So let us read this part. Let his paths of sunshine line on the surface of the water and dance, and the reflections wobble deliciously over the ceiling. A stir of my fingers sets them veering, reeling. I move a foot, and the planes of light in the water jar. I lie back and laugh, and let the green white water, the sun-flowed bearded water, flow over me. The day is almost too bright to bear. The green water covers from the too bright day. I will be here a while and play with the water and the sunspots. And it was for this very poem that she was mocked by Ezra Pound. Amy Lowell was very rich. And Ezra Pound ironically believed that his poetry is not for sale. But he always needed money. And when he needed money, he asked Amy Lowell for that. But when Amy, for example, was a hostess of a party and they were two there, Ezra Pound was also there, he put a kind of hat over his head, which was like a bathtub, to mock this piece written by Amy Lowell. So, and the lack of respect and the victimization of the female poet at the beginning of the 20th century, in which Ezra Pound and other figures thought that writing poetry, is a masculine task, or if you cannot write long poetry, you're not a poet enough. And Imagist poetry, because it focuses on the image, is rather short. And Ezra Pound also believed that they are not that he had passed this phase, but other poets like Lowell or Hilda de Little are not capable of this. And even Ezra Pound mocked Doolittle and called her poetry Imagist because by pronouncing the term in French, he was suggesting that the movement is not that much English, or it's not that much Anglophone. Let's say that your English is not enough for writing poetry. You're Imagist, not images. And let us read this piece from lines from Lau's poem Absence. But the cup of the heart is still and cold and empty. When you come it brims and red and trembling with blood. Heart's blood for young drinking. You're drinking to fill your mouth with love and the bittersweet taste of soul. Amy Lowell had a partner, and these poems are just written to her, and the metaphors here, like using the cup as the metaphor, not only of the cup itself literally, but also the metaphorical image of the lips of someone and the mouth of someone. So and also we have the image of the heart as the container of the emotions, but it is very terse and focused. Or this one, um which is the poem on the onlooker. Suppose we plant you like white-eyed Helen on the battlements of weary Troy. Just check that one image comes after the other without any explanations. Clutching the parapet with desperate hands, she too gazes at the battlefield, where bright vermilion plumes and metal whiteness shock and sparkle and go down with groans. Her glances strike the rocking battle, again, recoiling from like battled spearheads fallen from a brazen shield. The ancients at her elbow counsel patience and contingencies, such as to women stretched upon a bed of battle, who bargain for this only in the whispering eras enclosed about a midnight of enchantment. Sometimes Imilal calls her poetry cadence poetry, the poetry which has a rhythm, but this rhythm goes back to the structure, to the internal system of that poem itself, not reliant on any conventional, already known systems, we can say. And now let us move to the short poem, which is September 1918. September 1918 means the war. It's the beginning of the autumn, and the countries of the world were engaged in the Great War or the First World War. And she just is suffering from that, and she focuses on what is happening around, both in nature and in the society. This afternoon was the color of water falling through sunlight, and this is the first image, very beautiful. That today everything is so transparent. The trees glittered with the tumbling of leaves. Why the trees are glittering? Because if you noticed, the leaves have two sides. One side is shining, sparkling always. The other side is like is of a matte kind of color, so it is not that much shiny. And when the wind moves these leaves, it's like that they are like glittering or twinkling. The sidewalks shone like alleys of dropped maple leaves. So sidewalks are like maple leaves, and like alleys of dropped maple leaves. And just a point here, Ezra Pound says that in images poetry we make an equation of two images, and it is the task of the mind to analyze things and to connect them. So the two images are colluded, merged into one another, but the borderlines are blurry and we have to find them ourselves. We need to just use our analytic faculties of the mind. And the house ran along them laughing out of square open windows. The houses are just having faces, with the windows are and make faces for them, eyes and lips for them, and they are laughing because the windows are open. So this is another image and another collusion or blurring of the borderlines of two equation of the images. Under a tree in the park, two little boys lying flat on their faces were carefully gathering red berries to put in a pasteboard box. So these children are not aware of what is happening in the world. The darkness cannot touch them. They are intact and they are enjoying it, and they are just putting the all red berries into the pasteboard box so that they can just make a collection. They are not they are not going to devour them, or let's say they are just going to look at them later on. But for Amy Lowell, the case is different, or for a persona of this poem. Someday there will be no war, and now she makes her own personal reference. Then I shall take out this afternoon and turn it in my fingers. It's not just a thing for the pasteboard box, and remark the sweet taste of it upon my palate. I'm going to eat it, to devour this moment, to just taste it and note the crisp variety of flights of leaves. Today, I can only gather it and put it into my lunchbox. So pasteboard box and lunchbox, the difference, how she feels about this moment. For I have time for nothing but the endeavor to balance myself upon a broken world. The broken world, the fragmented world, because of the war and everything, the kind of speedy changes happening at the beginning of the 20th century, people felt to live in a chaotic world or lost, and she's making reference to that. But the endeavor to balance myself up in a broken world, and also poetry of the time was becoming more and more fragmentary as a reflection of the fragmented society, fragmented culture. And she, as an enculturated figure, as a poet, is trying to balance herself and her poetry, to keep her poetry consistent, the image coherent. And well, this was my reading of Amy Lowell's poem and explanation of her attitudes towards poetry. Thank you very much for listening. See you next time.